These are amazing times. The Iron Curtain tumbled. Iraq is humbled. The people of Israel emerge whole from under a rainstorm of murderous missiles. A tidal wave of Russian Jews reaches Israel. Truth and justice take center stage. Plus countless other amazing developments that are taking place in front of our eyes. Yes, we are living in the most extraordinary times as our world evolves toward a state of peace and mankind strives toward a state of perfection. The times are changing, not just for the better, but truly for the best. A cornerstone of Jewish faith is the belief that ultimately good and peace must triumph. This is the essence of Mashiach, who will usher in the final redemption ordained in the Torah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, emphasizes that these remarkable events are merely a prelude to the final redemption, culminating in a unity amongst people, domestic harmony, and cessation of hostilities between races, neighbors, and nations. The era of Mashiach is upon us. Learn about it. Be part of it. All you have to do is open your eyes, and inevitably, you will draw your own conclusion.
South Florida, in many ways truly a tropical paradise. Here, in what less than a century ago was just a few sandbars and wetlands, has developed one of the largest and most important of American cities. Blessed with a year-round warm climate and without many of the harsher aspects of nature, a community has lived free of winter storms, earthquakes, flash flooding, and mudslides that plague other parts of our country. However, there is one of Earth's most devastating forces that looms over this part of the globe. That is the hurricane. A generation settled and raised their families, seemingly with no fear of. However, that was all about to change. Being the first storm of the 1992 hurricane season, named Andrew, but it soon became apparent to everyone that this storm might be the big one. The hurricane that had been predicted for decades and could potentially wipe out much of what has been built here in South Florida. So, as the storm approached, millions prepared for Andrew's wrath. Throughout history, the Jewish people have turned to their Torah leaders for guidance in times of trouble. This story is of how we in South Florida turned to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and how we were shown that truly his eye was on the storm.
The radio and the media Bechlal were discussing the upcoming hurricane. It was on Shabbos, it was on Saturday. And Saturday, we don't hear much news, so we weren't much involved. But Saturday night, we heard that there is a hurricane watch, and then became a hurricane warning. And finally, Sunday morning, they said that everyone has to evacuate. This is going to be a very terrible hurricane, and the worst place that is going to be hit will be Miami Beach. And the worst part, he said, that's going to happen is that there will be surge, and the ocean and the bay And in between, all you have is about 7, 8, 9 blocks, and they're going to meet, and it's going to cover all the houses, and it's going to be a great disaster, and they said it's going to be terrible. And therefore, they said there was a mandatory evacuation. Now, that was Sunday morning. Sunday morning, we didn't know what to do, but as a chassid, the first thing you do, you ask the Rebbe. So when I came home from shul in the morning, I told my wife, we have to call New York to ask the Rebbe, and she said, well, my son, who was in New York then, Chaim, called, and he said that Rabbi Tenenhaus, who was the shliach of the Rebbe in Hollywood, Hallandale, he had called already, and the answer was that we should not evacuate.
I called the Rebbe's office. I spoke to Rabbi Groner. About 1 hour later, the Rebbe's office returned my call, and the Rebbe was told of the situation, and he clearly said not to evacuate.
I said, well, let's find out. I took the phone, I called Rabbi Groner, and Rabbi Groner said yes. He went into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe shook his head that you should not evacuate. Unfortunately, the Rebbe cannot speak now, so he asked the Rebbe that there is a warning about a hurricane in Miami, so should the people leave? And the Rebbe shook his head no. And he asked the Rebbe, does that mean that the Rebbe wants them to stay? And the Rebbe shook his head yes. And he again asked, that means that they should not go? And the Rebbe said, like that, shook his head no. So
obviously, a situation like this is something that's...
It's very clear, but it sounded very strange, because before we even called, I had made plans to leave. I had made plans with my brother-in-law, who is the shliach in Fort Lauderdale, that I would go there because this would be safer, they said. Some people had made plans to leave to Kendall because they said that would be safer. But after this, we decided, well, we're definitely not leaving. The Rebbe said not to leave.
This was the first response that the Rebbe gave concerning Hurricane Andrew. We asked whether our community should evacuate, and the Rebbe clearly said no. At that time, I left a word on my answering machine that as far as the hurricane is concerned, we're not sure. We're not evacuating. The Rebbe says not to evacuate. The only thing that for sure is coming is that Mashiach is coming. And we left this on the machine, and we know that we received several hundred calls during the course of the night.
As the day was progressing, we kept on listening to the radio, and we heard that they upgraded it to a number 5. Number 5, they said, was, I guess, the worst type of hurricane. He said it's going to be very terrible.
The police were coming around with bullhorns, telling everyone to get out of their homes. This place was a ghost town. It was unreal. You see it in the movies. It literally looked like a ghost town. The only people who stayed in Hallandale were those who knew that the Rebbe said to stay. And, of course, many of our good friends were pleading with us to please take our kids and our belongings, whatever we need, because our home will be washed away. Tidal waves will cover our roof.
People were panicking. The whole city was evacuating. You can't imagine what was going on here on Alton Road. I live here on Alton Road. The night before Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, there was traffic all night, because people were leaving, people were evacuating. In the morning, it started getting empty already. The town became empty. But anyway, as it was getting closer, people started panicking. Someone gave out a rumor that the Rabbi Groner said in the name of the Rebbe that if you want, you could leave. Anyway, I didn't understand. I called back Rabbi Groner. It was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I called back Rabbi Groner and I said to him, is there any changes? He said, no. So I said, what did they say in your name? He said, people called him to ask him what happens if they were going to come home and force you to leave, because they said on the radio that the police will go from house to house and they will force you to leave. So he said, so I answered him, well, if they force you to leave, I don't think you should fight with the police. I mean, you should leave, but nothing from the Rebbe. But then he asked me, well, what's doing? I said, well, they said it's going to be the worst. And so he said, you know what, I'll ask the Rebbe again. I said, I'm not asking you to ask. To me, it's enough what he said. He said, no, I'll ask again. It was on his own. And the truth is, I was afraid that when you ask a third time, it's like you're pushing the Rebbe. The Rebbe will say, no, if you want to go, what should I say? So he called me back. About 10 minutes later, he says, I went into the Rebbe again. I said, how did you ask? He says, no, I didn't push anything. I just told the Rebbe that we have the reports and it's getting worse. Should they leave? And the Rebbe said, no. And then he said, but is it going to be safe? I don't remember the exact expression. And he said, the Rebbe made with his head.
We know one thing. The Rebbe's nod of the head is to us emes, and the ultimate emes. And I knew that nothing possibly could go wrong. I knew that we would certainly be safe listening to the Rebbe's instructions of remaining where we were.
Never was an issue, a general issue that involved many people, that the Rebbe should take a very firm stand. They have been asking the Rebbe questions all along, but just personal questions. I broke for this, should I go into business? But it was the first time that there was a stand concerning a major issue that involved many people, and the Rebbe took a firm stand. And this gave a lot of encouragement to the Lubavitchers in New York too. A lot of people hearing that the Rebbe took a stand. 3 times he answered no, very strong. So we were confident.
The hurricane did hit us. I do want to make that clear. There was a hurricane and it hit us. What did not happen is that the hurricane was not deadly in the areas that the experts predicted it would be.
Around 12:30, we heard the wind starting to come and starting to howling. My father-in-law and my mother-in-law were here in the house too. We had borrowed a television from somebody to keep track, so we plugged it into that room. But then the wind started howling. We went out, we sat in that room, and then about, I'd say 1 o'clock, the electricity went off, the television went off, so we didn't have it, so we just had the radio. And they kept on saying in the radio that you should not stay in a room that have windows. Most people had to go into a closet or the bathroom or something. We have a room right here. That room is a room that's enclosed from all sides. So we had a room. It's not a big room, but it's a regular bedroom. We all went into that room, and we heard the winds howling. It was terrible. It sounded like there were people with machine guns shooting at the windows, and every second I was afraid that the windows would break, and who knows what would happen. Middle of the night, we kept on calling each other because for some reason the phone lines did not go dead. So we had contact with all the other people who were in their homes, and everyone was there watching and hoping that everything would be fine, having the emunah, trust in the Rebbe. The Rebbe said everything's going to be fine. It's interesting that there is a family here, I don't want to mention their name, that the husband is a Lubavitcher, the wife is not from a Lubavitcher family, but now she's like a Lubavitcher. She kept on calling all day my wife, should we leave or shouldn't we leave? My wife said, well, the Rebbe said not to leave. Why should you leave? Then she said, what does the Rebbe mean? Did the Rebbe mean that we will stay here and survive in 6 foot of water, but he promises we'll survive? Or does he mean that everything will be fine? So I said, I doubt that the Rebbe will want us to go through all that hardship and floating in water and then just will survive. So she stayed.
And of course, many of the seniors turned to us and asked us, what do we do? Rabbi, where do I turn? Where do I go? I can't be in a shelter.
Around 3 o'clock in the middle of the night, I got a phone call from this lady. My windows just broke. I thought, oy vey, out of all people, it had to happen to her who was in doubt to begin with. So I said, what can I tell you? All I could say is go into that closed room, stay out of the dining room and the living room, because they said the winds will come in and then the roof could go and all kinds of things. And I didn't know what to do. The first thing I did, I picked up the phone, tried to call New York to speak to Rabbi Groner and say, go into the Rebbe. It's getting terrible because the winds were howling and the kids here was crying and everyone was afraid. It was those few hours were terrible hours, and especially after this that happened to that lady. So I called. There was no answer. Middle of the night, or 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. But we kept on calling each other.
Some people were worried. They felt that, look, you're dealing with the Rebbe after his stroke. We know that he's a Rebbe, but maybe people were wondering whether the Rebbe's prediction was accurate. To me, it was no question. Ironically, after the event, after the storm, many people who ran to safe ground, such as in Kendall, regrettably, that's where the force and the eye of the storm hit. And those who were told not to evacuate, in Miami Beach, in North Miami Beach, in Hallandale, literally there were no deaths and very little damage.
Everything else seemed fine. I mean, the pool was full of dirt and some tiles from the roof. Well, we had some type of damages, but very little. And in the morning, we called up people, and everyone said, we don't know what happened, but everything was fine. We were waiting, sitting and waiting for the water to come. There was no water. There was less water outside than the regular rain. I don't know what happened. I called this lady. She says, as soon as it quieted down, she walked down to the house, into the other part of the house, where she expected a disaster. The windows broke, so she expected all the pictures from the walls to fly and to break things, and then the roof. Nothing happened. The window broke, and that's it. And we came to speak to everybody, and thank God there was no damage whatsoever. Later we heard that in Kendall, which is one of the places that they advised people to go, that was the worst. And therefore some people who left, they left to Kendall, and in Kendall they had such hardships. People told me, one family told me that He lives here on Miami Beach. He left his house, and in Kendall, he had to stand all night for those few hours, the whole family holding the door back that the wind shouldn't break it. The roof caved in. It was $1 million house. The roof caved in. He says it's going to be a night of terror he's going to remember. He came back, and he came to his house where he left. Everything was fine. Nothing was broken. I mean, just like regular, like it happened to all of us. When we went outside in the morning and we looked around what happened in the street, what could have happened, the street lights all over, the poles on the floor, trees uprooted, everything. And to the people and to the houses, such minor damage, and everything was fine. So we said this is only a miracle that the Rebbe did.
And this was a great miracle, a tremendous miracle, and a tremendous prophecy. And I thank God that I was part of it. It strengthened my faith. It strengthened the faith of many around me. And without a question in anyone's mind, it proved once again that there is a true prophet in Israel.
So in truth, there are a few miracles in my mind that I think are involved here. First of all, those people didn't leave and they stayed here, and they said clearly that it's coming this direction, and this is going to be hit the worst, and thank God it wasn't. Even for those people that were hurt, according to what could have happened, the way they predicted the amount of people that could have died and they said will happen, it was really so small. Money, the truth is the houses were destroyed, the insurance paid back. It was hard, but nevertheless, everything came back to normal. But the way they predicted, this was going to be the worst, and it was going to be here. And they said if it would happen in Miami Beach, they said later too, it would have wiped out the city. And thank God this didn't happen. And even what happened, it was a great disaster, a monetary disaster, and with a lot of problems. But nevertheless, we're looking at the way it could have been. We really thank God.
I would think that perhaps all of us should be inspired by this event to realize that the same Rebbe who told those in South Florida not to evacuate because the hurricane would not be deadly to them, the same Rebbe has said that Mashiach is about to be revealed, and Mashiach is about to happen, and the redemption is about to happen, and the time for redemption has arrived. And I hope that this story of the hurricane should serve as an inspiration to all of those who were unaware or perhaps did not realize the extent of the miracles of Andrew, to recognize that what the Rebbe says goes. And therefore, we're soon going to see, very soon, the revelation of Mashiach.
Years ago, Hurricane David was making a beeline straight to Miami. And Rabbi Korf, the head emissary of the Rebbe State, who lives in Miami Beach and is the head of all of the rest of the emissaries of the Rebbe here in Florida, he called the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said it's not necessary to evacuate. Then when it came close and it was looking like it was going to hit right at Miami, so then they called a second time. And the guru, who's supposed to be God, Maharishi, he was having a festival here with his so-called followers. So he's supposed to know what's going on. He calls himself God, and his followers call him God. He ran away to Orlando. And here the hurricane's coming straight to Miami, so the people are really getting afraid. So they called the Rebbe a second time. So the Rebbe didn't even answer. He just went like this. And it's as if he went like this with his hand, and all of a sudden the hurricane got a little hit, and it just, right from the beeline to Miami, it went north and to Orlando.
This was about 10 years before, I believe, and I remember that too. It was also after Shabbos. We were here, and they went to the same procedure. First there was a hurricane watch, then a hurricane warning, and finally they said it's coming. It's coming in the direction of Miami, and Miami Beach is going to be hit very hard. They even said it passed through the Dominican Republic, and there it killed 1,000 people. 1,000 people. Then it was coming towards our direction. Then I was the one that tried to get in touch with the Rebbe, and I couldn't get to the office. Anyway, Sunday morning, I think it was Sunday morning, or the morning of the hurricane, I called my father, who lives in New York, said, please go into the office and speak to Rabbi Klein and ask him to ask the Rebbe what we should do. I didn't ask whether we should leave or not. That wasn't a part of the question, because I called in and I left. I did leave. I went to Rabbi Eliezer's house then, I remember, because there was no question whether we should leave, but just to ask for a bracha. When I got to the house, to Rabbi Eliezer's house, I heard that there was an answer from the Rebbe. Anyway, I called back the office, so Rabbi Klein tells me like this. He wrote on a note that the The Lubavitchers from Miami Beach asked him to tell the Rebbe that they said there is a terrible hurricane coming, and it's going to be very dangerous, and they're asking for a bracha. So the Rebbe wrote these two words in Hebrew, Kenira Magzimim. It seems as if they are exaggerating. So Rabbi Klein tells me, he looked at the Rebbe. I mean, it was interesting that the Rebbe sitting in New York in his office is telling us what the hurricane, what's it called, the agency that is, what they're predicting, and they have their proofs. He's saying it's an exaggeration. So he turns around to the Rebbe right on the spot and he says to the Rebbe, but the Anash, the Lubavitchers of Miami, are afraid. So the Rebbe made, just like that with his hand. That's all. So I was away already. The Rebbe didn't say not to leave. I was there. I didn't want to pack up and come home. But really, maybe if I would have been a big chassid, I would just packed up and come home. But I was there already. I said, let's wait. And he also had borrowed the television from somebody, and we were watching. And as the day progressed, they said that it's getting closer and closer, and now there's a less chance for it to turn away. Now it's almost definite it's going to come to Miami. And we went to sleep at night, tried to sleep, and we're waiting until it would start early in the morning. So I'm sleeping, and one eye open, one eye closed. And I was waiting 5 o'clock in the morning for it to start raining heavy and winds, even though that wasn't the place it was supposed to really be, full force, but I expected it. It was raining, but nothing. We came down, we opened up the television, and the guy on the television says, we don't know what happened, we don't know how to explain it, but all of a sudden, the last minute, it turned. So my wife said, well, don't you understand? When the Rebbe made like that, he just turned it away.
Here we're talking about that the Rebbe knows what's doing, and the Rebbe has the power to influence events as well, but certainly he cares for all of us. He wants us to come close to Hashem, and therefore he guides us in such a way that enables us to serve Hashem properly. And he's the one that says that it has reached the time for your liberation. It has reached the time now. It's in our ballpark to bring the Mashiach. And he said this as a prophecy, not just as a rational, reasonable thing. And he said that he's done everything he can do, so now we have to do that to bring Mashiach. So like we see, the Rebbe has said prophecies over the years, and they come true, just like this hurricane, prophecy after prophecy after prophecy, and it comes true when the Rebbe says a prophecy that's coming from Hashem.
I want to express our thanks to Hashem that we Miami here, were able to be the vessels to show the world that there is a tzaddik, and the tzaddik knows, and you have to listen to him. That's a great merit for us, that, because at that time, whenever anybody heard the story, right, they always think, the Rebbe, and they got great respect for the Rebbe, and for Hashem, because the Rebbe represents the Torah. So I was thinking then, we here were the vessels that through us this happened. So I really want to thank the Rebbe for everything, including this, that we were the ones that brought about the world should recognize the greatness of Hashem. And certainly we have to thank Hashem for the miracles he did, even though at the same time when those people who suffered, we have to feel bad for them and we have to take care of them and help them, which is definitely true. But at the same time, we have to look at the good side. We have to look at the fact that Hashem spared us, and we have to thank him. And as we say, Avodav HaNeviim, thank his servant, the Rebbe Zol Gesund Sein.
You almost can say we had a bit of a Passover miracle.
Right, right. It passed over us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome. And we should only be able to sit and discuss miracles. And now we're waiting for the greatest miracle. First of all, that the Rebbe will become healthy 100%. And the second thing, right after that, that we will go to the Geula Shlema, to the complete redemption very, very soon.
Amen. Thank you very much.